conference room where we're here for today's exercise. At this time, I'd like you to do two things. We will have the start of the day's program with a playing of the national anthem of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and then we will have the invocation, which will be done by Rawlson Patterson. Please stand.
As we remain standing, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you, God, for this conference. And this morning, Father, I pray a very special blessing upon our proceedings today. I pray that our conference will be fruitful and it will be dynamic in your name as we share with each other. Amen.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. I wish to recognize this morning the Honorable Camila Gonsalves, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Information Technology, and Mrs. Gonsalves, Scott Ferguson Dunwood, British High Commissioner to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, Malcolm Gare, UK Development Director to the Caribbean, Isaac Solomon, Vice President Operations at the Caribbean Development Bank, development partners in the room and joining online, staff at Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, and the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in Barbados. Participants, those who are listening via radio and television in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, media colleagues, good morning all. And I take this opportunity to welcome you to the inaugural UK Caribbean Infrastructure Conference, which will take place from today until the 24th of November here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The task assigned to do the official welcome goes to the Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Information Technology, the Honorable Camila Gonzalez. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcome to the lectern to officially welcome you, the Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Dion. Recognize His Excellency, the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom to this part of the world, and we should all take a moment to express our sympathies to him. He told me that the last couple of days he's been on hardship duty in some of the most idyllic and beautiful Grenadines, some of the most beautiful islands in the world, checking out projects that are funded partially by the UK government, so condolences to you. Isaac Solomon, our friend and brother in the Caribbean Development Bank, members of the development community, both here and online, and of course all of our guests from across the Caribbean. Welcome to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I've been told very strictly and very repeatedly over the last few days that I'm bringing welcome remarks and I'm not delivering a mini keynote, so I'm going to be very brief. First of all, I want to thank the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund for all of the wonderful work that they have done and continue to do across the Caribbean. We know that this fund was announced some years ago, and there have been multiple administrations in the United Kingdom since its initial announcement, and I want to thank the government of the United Kingdom and the successive governments of the United Kingdom for remaining true to their commitment to the Caribbean region with the Caribbean Infrastructure Fund. We have all across the region used the resources of the fund in different ways, but all of those ways have addressed the issue that we're all here to discuss at this conference, which is resilience. Many of the countries have used resources from the fund to strengthen their road networks. I know that Jamaica has used it for primarily for agricultural purposes, irrigation and the like. Montserrat and St. Vincent and the Grenadines have used the resources to improve our port infrastructure, and in our case to build an entirely new port. And the UK CIF has been critical either in the design, development, and implementation of those projects, or in helping to crowd in additional resources to catalyze the input of additional resources to help these projects be completed. And in that regard, the Caribbean Development Bank has played an absolutely indispensable role in helping all of our countries to access and utilize the UK CIF funds. And I want to thank Isaac and Jean Leon and the entire Caribbean Development Bank for the wonderful work that they've been doing as a partner to UK CIF in this regard. All of our islands are vulnerable, and you're going to hear the keynote on this later. And many items of our vulnerability, many aspects of our vulnerability can't be changed. We're not going to get any bigger. We're not going to move to another part of the world where hurricanes are less frequent. We're not going to flatten our mountains. We are not going to suddenly double or triple our populations. And many of our economic vulnerabilities are also inbuilt. But what we can change is our resilience and the ways in which we bounce back from the challenges of vulnerability, and the ways in which we plan for and cut off at the pass some of the challenges that affect us now are critical. And many of those resilience building exercises have a lot to do with infrastructure. It has a lot to do with our coastal defenses. It has a lot to do with improved road networks and infrastructure there. It has a lot to do with our main trading infrastructure, like our airports and our ports. And all of us have recognized this, and in different ways we are preparing for a future in which the challenges to vulnerability become greater and greater. We are all getting ready for the next COP, the Conference of Parties in the United Arab Emirates, that will deal in a very real way with the challenges of vulnerability and the fact that the large global emitters have yet to meet their commitments to deliver a world where global warming is less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And once we get beyond that, all of our islands will face the brunt of the challenges of climate change. We're already facing it, and the latest reports from the scientists say that we don't have to wait till we get to 1.5 degrees to see the challenges, and that each incremental rise in the global temperature has an exponentially large impact on the countries of the Caribbean. And as Bob Marley says, who feels it knows it. I don't need to tell any of you this. We are in the midst of a struggle, a battle against climate change and against other challenges that exacerbate our vulnerability. And it's going to be the story of our development for decades and decades to come. And an indispensable component of that battle is climate resilient infrastructure. And it's what we do with the limited resources we have to make our people safer and make our people better able to withstand the challenges that we all know will come. That's why we're here today. The government of the United Kingdom, to their everlasting credit, has recognized this, and successive governments have made commitments not only to greening the United Kingdom and reducing their own emissions, but to making a contribution to adaptation financing and helping us build infrastructure that is climate resilient and can exist and survive in this modern era of sea level rise, of global warming, of increasingly frequent and increasingly intense storms and hurricanes here in the Caribbean, and droughts, to mention the challenges that Jamaica is addressing with the UK SIF program. We're very happy to have you all here today. We hope that this cross-pollination of experts will help to breed new ideas, new solutions, establish new best practices for the way in which modern 21st century infrastructure in the Caribbean can be more resilient, more sustainable, more inclusive, and better able to assist the people that we're all here to assist, the citizens of our various countries. I want to welcome you all to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I know you're here for a week. I think I see you guys later at the reception. You're not going to be as lucky as Scott to get down to the Grenadines, but I think that you'll have a good time here and we'll learn a lot from each other. So thank you all very much for coming. I hope you enjoy your visit to our port. Is that tomorrow, Lenski? Later? This afternoon. We're very proud of the project. We're very proud of how far we've progressed so far. And we hope that we can all learn from one another in developing a stronger, more resilient, more sustainable, and safer Caribbean for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Gonsalve. Just some preliminaries. If you're tweeting or if you're engaged in any of the social media platforms, I've been told to let you know that you are to use these two hashtags, hashtag UKSIFConf 2023. So that's hashtag UKSIFConf 2023 and hashtag building resilience. So those are the two hashtags you're to engage if you're using the social media platforms. Now, this week's conference is made possible through UK CIF, which is a £350 million grant-funded program from the UK government to build climate-resilient, inclusive infrastructure and boost economic growth in the Caribbean. This is administered by the Caribbean Development Bank. And this morning we have an address, introductory remarks, which will be done, this is a pre-recorded address by the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Dr. Jean Leon.
It is my pleasure to welcome you to the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Conference being held in the beautiful island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Colleagues, the impact of global events over the last 3.5 years is clear. Our development effort needs urgent action. Although our BMCs have demonstrated some fortitude, their vulnerabilities and low resilience capacity have limited progress towards the attainment of SDGs. The Caribbean Development Bank is addressing this challenge by steadily increasing support to our BMCs. In 2022, total disbursements increased by 12.2% to $286 million US dollars, comprising $181 million US dollars in loans and $105 million in grants. This could not have been possible without our valuable partnership with the government of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland and every government within the UK CIF portfolio. Ladies and gentlemen, this partnership we speak of is instrumental to building resilient prosperity in our BMCs. Why? Because it has facilitated the delivery of development projects that have transformed the lives and livelihoods of our people in a way that neither the bank, the governments, nor the private sector could have implemented and completed alone. Minister Mitchell, resilient prosperity requires continued investment. It is imperative, therefore, that the UK CIF program, which ends in March of 2026, is renewed. I propose a moonshot. Let us commit jointly to implementing a doubling in portfolio value to $2 billion US dollars within 5 years of a UK CIF renewal. This region deserves nothing less. Our global position and implications of our structural characteristics will always determine our vulnerabilities. But when we upscale the financing in partnerships such as this one with UK CIF, it allows our governments to make each project a quality resilience building investment. In conclusion, let me reiterate that CDB will relentlessly pursue its ambitious agenda to build internal resilience capacity in the BMCs. First, by enhancing the development paradigm to reflect part structural legacy of yesterday, part shocks of today, and part capacity to recover and continue to grow. Second, by increasing access to adequate and affordable financing. And third, by leveraging partnerships for sustainable development. However, we cannot do that without the collaboration of our development partners. And that, colleagues, requires the sharing of a common vision. Indeed, the sustainable and transformative development we seek is our joint responsibility. I look forward very much to the outcomes of this event and to give my assurance to you that your success is our success. Together, we will deliver on our development mandate. Thank you.
In appreciation of the remarks from Dr. Leon. This week's conference will also focus on capturing valuable lessons from the 13 transformational infrastructure projects being implemented under the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund. We will also have another pre-recorded address. This time around, we will hear from the UK Minister of State for Development, the Right Honourable Andrew Mitchell.
Good morning. Although I would much prefer to be with you in person in beautiful St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I am still pleased to be sharing my thoughts from London at the beginning of this important and exciting week for all of you. I am delighted that the UK, in partnership with the Caribbean Development Bank, has brought you all together this week. I feel it is so important that leading professionals like you share the key lessons you have learned while delivering some of the region's largest and most complex infrastructure projects in recent history. I am all too aware of the myriad climate-related threats that your region faces. Over 10 years ago, on my first visit to the Caribbean, I witnessed the devastating aftermath of the Soufriere Hills volcanic eruption in Montserrat. Such natural disasters have become all too common. Indeed, the impacts of climate change are being felt across the world, but the Caribbean is especially vulnerable. This is why we have invested so heavily in climate-resilient infrastructure throughout the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund. This fund is enabling 13 transformational infrastructure projects to be built in the region, driving inclusive economic and social development and increasing resilience to the future shocks and challenges that climate change will bring. The fund's projects are crucial, yet much more needs to be done. We need to build on its foundations to achieve more and better development. Reflecting on and learning from our experiences helps us improve. You only have to watch the game of cricket to know this. Much success in the sport is reliant on avoiding past mistakes and patterns. The same lessons apply to us. What bounces has our infrastructure fund delivered, and what have we learned from them? How can we read the ball to see what is coming so we are prepared for it? The lessons and good practice you discuss over the coming 5 days will improve the delivery of your current and future projects and equip you to achieve more for your countries. I am delighted that officials from Britain's Infrastructure and Projects Authority and British Standards Institute will join you to share our experience in infrastructure delivery and improving standards and regulations in the sector. You clearly have a packed and rich agenda ahead. I wish you a successful and productive week together. I encourage you to make the most of this opportunity. If I were to offer some advice, I would say make new contacts, share openly and honestly, and listen and absorb what your colleagues say. And be clear on what action you can take after you leave, what you can do or think about differently, and what resources you can draw upon. Together, you can have a significant impact in making the Caribbean more prosperous and resilient and help improve people's lives in the region. Britain will continue to stand by you to support resilient growth for the benefit of all. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention. And at this time in our program, we will bring you now the keynote address. Dr. Emily Wilkinson is a Senior Research Fellow at the Global Affairs think tank ODI and Director of the Resilient and Sustainable Islands Initiative. She has 25 years' experience as a researcher, analyst, journalist, lecturer, and advisor to the government, providing critical analysis and leading debate on sustaining the development of small island developing states in an era of accelerating climate change. Emily has served as Chief Scientific Advisor to the Climate Resilience Agency for Dominica, supporting the nation's ambition to become the world's first climate resilient nation, and is a Senior Advisor to the Alliance for Small Island States. Emily holds a PhD in human geography from the University College of London and has published over 50 reports, articles, and book chapters on climate and disaster risk governance and finance. Today's keynote will look at the topic from structural vulnerability to resilient prosperity in small island developing states. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming to the lectern to address us this morning, Emily Wilkinson, Senior Research Fellow and Director, Resilient and Sustainable Islands Initiative, the ODI.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, it is my great pleasure to be giving this keynote talk for the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Conference 2023. I want to thank the organisers for inviting me and making it possible to record this presentation. I've just come back to the UK from visiting the Marshall Islands in the North Pacific, and it's interesting to see the challenges that they face and the policies being developed to deal with the impacts of climate change that are in some ways similar to Caribbean islands, but also very different challenges. There is nothing like the kind of remoteness, costs, and challenges of reaching other islands here in the Caribbean region. And indeed, the fact that you are all together at this conference, exchanging lessons and views on infrastructure development across the region and on your specific projects, is testament to the opportunities that regional integration and collaboration creates. I want to start this talk with a recap of the common challenges faced by all small island developing states that are becoming increasingly apparent in this polycrisis world. All SIDS are highly vulnerable to external shocks compared with larger countries because they have small populations, small bureaucracies, small economies, and a lack of economic diversification, small domestic markets, high costs of development, challenges in connectivity, and highly fragile environments. In this context, resilience is not a nice to have, it's a necessity. As we approach the next 10-year SIDS conference to be held in Antigua and Barbuda next May, I see the concept of resilient prosperity increasingly being used by diplomats and policymakers. This is because the vision or challenge ahead is not only to achieve prosperity, but to ensure that that very prosperity is not undermined by crises. What that means effectively is that resilience needs to be built into everything. This is a challenge given the global context. The fourth SIDS conference will take place at a critical moment, or what political scientists call a critical juncture, because the world is changing, making it more difficult for SIDS to set their own agendas and to develop than ever before. Let me briefly describe this scenario. First, geopolitical shifts are occurring that undermine multilateralism in which SIDS have been able to operate quite effectively because of their numbers. Secondly, we are seeing economic shifts away from a more globalized, permissive economic system, which had benefited SIDS because they were able to exploit economic niches and generate foreign exchange. And thirdly, environmental challenges are happening, which, as we know, are affecting SIDS more rapidly and forcefully than any other group of countries. In the next 10 years, the world will likely cross the 1.5-degree global warming threshold set by the Paris Agreement, with devastating effects for SIDS. The reason I point to this much bigger global context is to emphasize that the next 10-year agenda for SIDS can no longer be business as usual. Radical action is needed to ensure resilient prosperity by 2034. I don't need to tell you that storms and floods are frequent events in the region. Amongst the 29 Caribbean islands, 22 were affected by at least one Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane in 2017. But there have been other years with multiple events, and extreme weather is no longer a rarity. It is the reality of everyday life that we will all have to learn to deal with. This slide shows some figures from a very recent publication produced by ODI's Resilient and Sustainable Islands Initiative, RESI. The report entitled The Costs of Inaction Calculating the Climate Change-Related Costs of Extreme Weather in Small Island Developing States, which has been published today, is a first attempt at estimating what climate change is costing small island nations. Using reported data on losses for the last 23 years, we find that every year SIDS experience $1.7 billion US in economic losses that can be directly attributed to climate change. That's a sizable 0.8 degrees of GDP on average. Of this total, the Caribbean accounts for 92% of all attributed deaths, 85% of attributed numbers affected, and 93% of economic losses in all SIDS. The Bahamas, Cuba, Dominica, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti have amongst the highest attributed losses. When expressed as a percentage of government revenues, the impact of climate change appears to be even more pronounced amongst SIDS in comparison to other countries. Loss and damage in SIDS as a percentage of revenues is 3 to 5 times higher than for non-SIDS with the same level of income. The report then uses climate projections from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to estimate losses in the future. We see that loss and damage in SIDS will be 11% higher over the next 23 years than for the last 23 years, and that by 2050, floods and storms will produce cumulative loss and damage of $56 billion under a 2 degrees of warming scenario. And we do need to be prepared for this, as it now looks almost certain that the 1.5 degree threshold set in the Paris Agreement as a safe level of global warming will be breached. Not all climate change losses are related to extreme weather events, though. The recent IPCC report on impacts, adaptation and vulnerability, which includes a special focus on small islands and oceans, finds that there will be irreversible losses in terrestrial, freshwater and coastal and open marine ecosystems, and there's a high degree of confidence in that there will be increasing weather and climate extremes exposing people to acute food insecurity in small islands, also high confidence, and that climate change will drive displacement with small island states disproportionately affected, also a high degree of confidence. Given this very alarming context, my team of researchers have also been looking carefully at international development and climate finance available to SIDS to address these climate challenges. As you can see from the figure, finance directed at SIDS explicitly for building resilience from 2013 to 2021 has been lower for SIDS than other groups of countries. Even in relation to the size of the overall economy, it's low. SIDS get less than all groups except non-SIDS in the upper middle income category. If you look at the composition of this finance, you can see how literally building resilience is so important. The biggest projects or investments in SIDS for resilience are transport, renewable energy, and water and sanitation projects, as well as those that are classified as disaster prevention and preparedness, which may also be infrastructure projects, including things like building seawall walls and other coastal defences to protect people and property from storm surge and coastal flooding. I want to turn now to one example of building resilience from the country in the Caribbean with which I'm most familiar, Dominica. I worked with CREED in Dominica for 4 years as the knowledge and results lead, which was a huge privilege and opportunity for me to put years of research and evidence into practice. Many, if not all of you, will be very familiar with this story. Tropical Storm Erica in 2015 had a devastating impact on the country, and just as Dominica was starting to recover, Hurricane Maria struck, causing loss and damage equivalent to 226% of the GDP. Dominica, like other Caribbean nations, is seeing more frequent and intense storms, but also droughts, fires, coastal erosion, and coral bleaching. Climate change is already here, and radical action is needed to prepare people and bolster infrastructure to avoid these kinds of losses from happening ever again. And that's what Dominica is doing. Prime Minister Skerritt set the bold ambition of becoming the world's first climate resilient nation, and CREED was established with support from the UK government, followed by a Climate Resilience and Recovery Plan, the CRRP, which was produced to translate this vision into a set of activities and targets to be reached by 2030. The CRRP is Dominica's blueprint for building resilience in a multi-hazard small island context, and has, I think, been an inspiration to many. The CRRP has 20 high-level targets to focus and guide activities and investments, and these include a target of 0 fatalities from extreme weather events, communities being able to operate safely and independently for 15 days, and 90% of housing stock being built or retrofitted to resilient building codes. The total cost of achieving this vision is approximately $3.3 billion. We can say that in the first 3 years, so from 2018 to 2021, Dominica received about $302.5 million US, so a little less than 1/10 of the total. Two projects that contribute significantly to this financing are the Louvière to Bagatelle Road and Bridge Rehabilitation Project, the water supply and wastewater infrastructure upgrade. So these two projects are an important part of building resilience in Dominica. This is an impressive ambition, and a lot has been achieved so far, but there's still a long way to go. Building resilience is an ongoing challenge and imperative for all Caribbean countries, and it doesn't stop in 2030 or even in 2050. So can progress be made on development and prosperity increased for all Caribbean citizens over the next 10 years, despite all of these challenges? I remain cautiously optimistic. Certainly, huge investments are going to be needed to ensure infrastructure throughout the region is fit for purpose for the 21st century. But there is greater willingness to do this, to make these investments despite the elevated costs, to consider alternatives and build with nature than there has ever been before. When I started my journey as a research scientist around 20 years ago, where I was working looking at indigenous adaptations to extreme weather in the Caribbean coast of Mexico, politicians were not taking any of this seriously enough. Extreme weather was wreaking havoc across the wider region, but more often than not, infrastructure was getting built back in the same place with the same problems. This is no longer acceptable, and attitudes are changing despite the costs of building back better or stronger or building forward better. Since vulnerabilities are still there, small populations, small economies, high development costs, and fragile environments, and these are being accentuated by climate change. But with more finance and smart, resilient infrastructure investments, some of these risks can be mitigated and the resilience of economies, societies, and environments strengthened. This is happening throughout the Caribbean, as you will know better than most, and thanks to the work that you are doing to implement and put into practice the high-level vision of leaders. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you every success in this important conference.
Much. That was a keynote presentation this morning, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the official end of this part of today's exercise. We will move right into the panel discussion, and at this time I would like to hand over to the moderator for this part of the session, Dr. Harriet Stone. So Dr. Harriet Stone is a team leader for the UK CIF, working at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government. She is an expert in the fields of resilience, disaster risk and infrastructure, and has worked at DFID, the World Bank and the Overseas Development Institute. She is a chartered civil engineer with an engineering doctorate from the University College of London, researching disaster risk assessments in Latin America and the Caribbean. Please welcome Dr. Harriet Stone.
Is that working? Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Can I maybe invite my panelists to come up now, and I'll introduce you when we're up here. Forgive me for having my phone. I need to keep track of the panelists not talking too much, okay? I'm going to be strict. Fantastic. Okay, so as the panelists settle themselves on these very comfortable sofas, I'm just going to introduce this session. So we're going to have a panel discussion with 2 people in the room, 2 people virtually. Hopefully they are connecting. And the topic is building inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable infrastructure in the Caribbean. What have we learned? So we are trying to start the conversation about that's really hard to build all of those things. It's hard to build infrastructure. It's hard to build it inclusively, safely, resiliently. All of those things are really challenging. but we're going to have a conversation about how we're doing that, how we can do it better, what we've learned so far, and obviously that conversation will then continue this afternoon and over the next few days as we go into more workshop style things. We heard from Minister Gonzalez that the challenges in the Caribbean aren't going to change. You're not going to move, you're not going to float to a different part of the world, you're not going to grow and have more people, your mountains aren't going to be flattened. It's how we respond. That's the important bit. And he said infrastructure is key to that response. And I think all of us in this room will agree with that. He talked about a cross-pollination of ideas to try and do the best job we can in that response. And that's what we're here for, that cross-pollination of ideas. Emily mentioned that this is no longer business as usual. We all understand that, I think, that it's not getting easier, it's getting more difficult. Climate change is happening, and we need to really think about this response and how we can do it in the best way. So, we're here today. The objective of this session is to hear a range of views and perspectives from people outside of this room, outside of the project teams that we have here, on what they've learned on designing and implementing infrastructure to start that conversation, to start that cross-pollination of ideas. So, let me introduce the panel. So, do we have colleagues online? Mr. Balgobin, maybe? I'll start with the people in the room. So we're really pleased to have Inea Semasi here, who is the head of International Business Development at Polytechnica. He brings 28 years of experience as a company's associate senior engineer, specializing in consulting engineering services for the construction sector. His focus lies in transport infrastructure and large building projects. Since 2011, he's been leading on the international development strategies for the company, overseeing tenders, procurements, and contracts for engineering services. He navigates projects funded by the International Financing Institutes, such as the Caribbean Development Bank, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, African Development Bank, lots of different banks, a European Investment Bank too. Polytechnica are currently working across the region, I believe in Belize, Guyana, Jamaica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but correct me if I'm wrong, Inea. So he will bring a really rich perspective from an engineer's perspective on the ground. What's he learned on the ground implementing these projects? We are also joined by two multilateral development bank colleagues. Let me just find, yes. So in the room here, we are really pleased to have Roberto Aiello, who's a principal regional energy specialist for the Caribbean region for the Inter-American Development Bank. He's 25 years of experience in investment, operations, technical assistance, and developing policies in energy and sustainable development. Prior to the Caribbean, he coordinated energy programs in the Southern Cone, based in Paraguay, and with responsibilities in Chile and Uruguay too. And before that, he was based in DC as a principal energy advisor. Before joining the IDB, he was at the World Bank doing similar roles and across the Caribbean and the Pacific. So we also have, hopefully online, I'm looking to the tech people. I'll go ahead and introduce them just in case they can hear me, but we can't see them. So we have Natalia Romero from the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, GFDRR, at the World Bank. She co-leads the Resilient Infrastructure thematic area. Before joining GFDRR, Natalia was part of the World Bank's operations teams, providing support to World Bank clients across Southeast Africa. She's a civil engineer with experience in applied analytics, including network modeling and climate and disaster risk assessment. And she's worked in, there's a long list of countries here, but she's worked all over the world in all different regions, holds a PhD in civil infrastructure systems engineering from Cornell. We also, hopefully online, will be joined by Mr. Tarachand Balgobin, who is the current Chief Planning Officer for the Ministry of Finance in Guyana and is a member of the Board of Directors for the Caribbean Development Bank. Mr. Balgobin brings over 3 decades of impactful experience specializing in project management and public administration. He has been instrumental in formulating national development strategies in Guyana. He's served as the Director for Project Cycle Management at the Ministry of Finance and is the principal negotiator for several multilateral and bilateral loans and grants for the government of Guyana. So Mr. Balgobin will obviously bring that perspective from the government and the client side. So, am I going to get an answer on the tech? Are they online? Okay. Oh, we can see someone. Fantastic. Okay. Hi, Mr. Valgoben. We can see Natalia. Lovely to have you here. Mr. Valgoben, we can't see you, unfortunately, but hopefully we can resolve that. Okay, so that was a bit of a handful. Let's get to the interesting bit of the discussion. So, Natalia, I wanted to start with you, actually. In your experience, what are the main lessons that have emerged over the past decade as the World Bank continues to invest in resilience in the Caribbean and elsewhere? What areas have you been focusing on and why?
And thank you very much, and also thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion on the lessons learned about studying infrastructure. Well, I mean, as you all know, the World Bank has a long-standing history of supporting the world for consumer resilience, especially for the most vulnerable population, and that includes financing for infrastructure. And we also know that it makes sense. I think probably a lot of here gathering today know that Einstein's core work when there was that collection of evidence and also the know-how and also some analytical studies on like how and low and middle countries could save 4.2 trillion for benefit for each dollar invested in city infrastructure. So we know it makes sense, and from that same collection of evidence, there's no 5 key recommendations that apply worldwide and apply at the region of the Caribbean that we know that we can get the basics right, good planning, good design, good construction, but also going beyond that, like think also about how to complete operation maintenance of that infrastructure, because the reality is that civil infrastructure is really the main objectives of resilient service, I would say, does make purpose why we make those investments, right? Also on like creating that institutions to have that vision of resilience and the coordination across the different actions. And then also looking at how we integrate those objectives of resilience into maybe revised standards. And I really saw that. I think there was one of the projects in the approach where that is what that knowledge was really integrated also like how those standards for construction like should be revised considering those the information risk. Also, like we need to focus on including decision making, and that means access to better data and tools to use that data, but also on the skills that needs to be to use that data. And I think of course all we know in terms of the importance of financing. And when we think about financing, not just think about that capital investment, but it's also like financing on the studies, the practical studies, the good studies that are informed by risk. Also, like how the financing, the part of managing those assets. And something else that is important is like how do we able to utilize to keep, for example, that data resource that is so important for improved decision making. So these recommendations give you a good sense in terms of that systematic approach. It goes again beyond the design and delivery of construction. We think about like how that infrastructure is going to be operated. Now, looking more. Yes. Am I going beyond my time yet?
No, continue.
Okay.
There was no noise from our side.
Going beyond that, I mean, focusing more on the Caribbean, I think that there is I'm just going to go through an example of a project, for example, that closed a little bit more than a year ago from the World Bank, focused on disaster and vulnerability reduction in the Grenadines and Vincent and the Grenadines. That project, again, from that general recommendations, focus on strengthening institutional coordination, the strategic planning, also monitoring the capacity to manage those disasters, and also something that is really important when we have, in a context of such a high exposure to that risk, to the hazards, how do we prioritize those investments? You know, what is the most critical? So in that project, focus on that rehabilitation or recovery of critical infrastructure, and strengthening also the capacity to deliver on like that improved design. Some of the message also after that investment is that thinking beyond, like what I was saying before, beyond the financing of that reconstructed and improved design of that infrastructure, and how we're going to finance and secure the financing then to maintain the assets and also the asset management system that we're delivering to that project. Similarly, the project invested in data sharing platforms, and how do we also as we continue like to use those platforms, like make sure that the budget lines to maintain them are there, I think is also critical. And then overall, and I think it was highlighted in previous sessions too, is that for the Caribbean, it's important to think about that clear vision and a strategy of like how to strengthen resilience across the region, how to develop more opportunities like where we are initiating today, and like sharing that knowledge and like learning across the region and developing partnership for resilience. So with that, I think that would be my introduction and sharing of the best practices, what we have learned in the World Bank, worldwide, but also I think more focused on a project in the Caribbean.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Natalia. There was a lot in there. And I definitely am picking up the point around prioritization. There isn't enough finance out there. So to best achieve resilience, we need to really think about how we prioritize that finance. Roberto, I wanted to turn to you. And on that point, I guess, and relatedly, what sectors are IDB? Hopefully I'm still working. What sectors are IDB focusing on in terms of building resilient infrastructure in the Caribbean and Latin America? And what lessons have you been learning from your side as you fund those projects?
Thank you very much, Harriet. Hello? Yeah. Maybe it's better now? Yeah. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. And thanks, Harriet. And first off, let me say thank you for inviting us to be here in this very important discussion. For the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, infrastructure means in some ways we focus on energy, transportation, and water and sanitation. And when we talk about infrastructure, we have a very integrated, holistic approach, meaning that while the structures and the assets are indispensable, we also focus in looking at the service providers, the public regulations, and the user behavior as well, as part of the package. And that in some ways it comprises what we call sustainable infrastructure. The needs in the region are really big. I mean, while the access to some of these services are really high on average, there still remain a lot of challenges. We can discuss that if you like later during the discussion. But there's plenty of lessons learned that we have seen throughout the years, and I'd like to share a few. In fact, I'd like to start by mentioning sort of in the institutional and regulatory space, one of the areas where we're really focusing in the work, and we believe it's very, very important, it relates to the importance of planning and sequencing of projects. Without, or in the absence of such planning and the sequencing, sort of infrastructure development turns in some ways haphazard. And we miss a lot of opportunities that could be taken on. In the policy space, policy provides direction to the sector. You aim where you want to go and you establish goals and targets. But at the same time, what we have seen, it's important that those targets and goals are not only aspirational, that they are backed, in fact, by robust plans, including master plans and the like investment plans. And for doing that, obviously, political willingness is very, very important. But important that political willingness goes beyond the now, and it's sort of longer term. What I mean to say with that is it's very important that these investment plans are in some ways discussed and there is consensus across different political parties beyond one administration in particular. And that really proves quite effective. In the absence of that, then we get into situations where projects are stopped, they get delayed, they don't happen, and it jeopardizes sustainability at the same time. We often see that maintenance is neglected. And this is because obviously it's, in many ways it's more, more attractive and the focus is put on new investments, new infrastructure, But in many cases we see that investing in operation and proper maintenance of the assets can render more cost-effective solutions to increase the services. Like, just to give a few examples, water losses on average in the Caribbean are about 40%. Rather than investing in new, pipes, it's better to work on on the existing infrastructure, in terms of electricity losses, on average, they're pretty high. So important to work on technical and non-technical losses. Investing on those would provide more cost-effective solutions. The second point on this topic I wanted to mention is about project implementation, project management implementation capacities. You know, the effective implementation of infrastructure projects is important that it requires well-trained staff in a number of dimensions, right? And at times we see that some staff are, you know, in charge of too many projects and they're complex at the same time and they cannot dedicate to cover properly all of the dimensions. And when I mean dimensions, we're talking about technical, legal, procurement, financial management, communications, environmental and social, and the like. And on the topic of procurement, for instance, you know, development partners like MDBs, like us, multilateral development banks, when we finance projects, the recipient has to utilize specific procurement rules, specific procurement procedures. Now, that requires very specifically trained personnel and staff. In the absence of that, projects get really lagged, and they, you know, in fact, they take a lot of time, and there's a lot of challenges for the implementation. So it's very important to build capacity on that. That's something that we have to do together with governments, development partners, universities, and get a pool of talent that can handle properly these functions. I was mentioning environmental and social. Environmental and social, these dimensions need to be addressed early on in the project. If the environmental and social challenges are not addressed early on, they turn into barriers to the project development, and then, you know, produces frustration and the like. On the flip side, you know, engaging and working with communities obviously enhances the effectiveness of the project, and also this, you know, contributes significantly to the sustainability of the project. Now, equally important in terms of resilience and response mechanisms, as Natalia was mentioning, all the infrastructure projects that we work with, we include in the design all of the sort of climate proof or natural hazards proof in the design, very important. Also, we're working on the response mechanisms. We have to make sure that there are response mechanisms in place. We're working across different development partners, including the UK, in those discussions, but also to train the key stakeholders to be able to react in the aftermath of our situation. And one additional point, and then we can continue, is the market challenges that we have seen, and there's ways of addressing that. You know, the local markets, the small economies of scale in the Caribbean are challenges, and that in some ways to cost effectiveness of the projects and to have a strong position for bargaining, you know, with technology providers. That's a challenge. That is indeed a challenge, but there's ways around that. We can get together around that in order to make sure that there's ways of, you know, reaching more cost-effective projects and making sure that the market is ready. For instance, you know, disclaiming projects in advance, way ahead, doing market signaling together, like common actions, like common standards for equipment, grid codes that are similar. We're talking now a lot about electric mobility. Okay, let's adopt the same standards for this across the Caribbean. On the regulatory space, the same situation. And going back quickly to the regulatory space, we also note that most of the regulatory frameworks are, or in many cases, they are outdated and they are not fit for purpose at the moment. So we need to work on those areas as well. I'll stop here and we can talk further on during the discussion. Thanks.
And a lot of value in what you're saying, and we'll continue the conversation definitely. But I'm gonna. You started talking about the standards and regulatory space, and we will, as the conference, we will come to that towards the end of this week, and I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion on that. But I'm going to come back to a point you made earlier around policy providing the direction, and that's really needed. And Natalia touched on it as well when she talked about that strategic planning cycle, that kind of program of where a country is going in its infrastructure development over years. So, Mr. Valgoven, we're going to turn to you because we're talking about government policy. So, the government of Guyana, like many other governments in the region, have been investing a lot in resilience in various different sectors, using blended finance with loans and grants like from the UK CIF and with government counterpart financing too. What's the biggest challenge that you have found in implementing these large, resilient infrastructure projects, and what lessons have you learned sitting in the government or in the client chair?
Thank you very much. Are you hearing me well?
We're hearing you well, I think. Yes.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me express my gratitude for being invited to participate in this process. My commiserations to the UK CIF, to the Caribbean Development Bank, and to the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I think the last set of discourse just now is a good entree to what I want to say. And let me start out by taking a cue from that and deal with the issue of national leadership. You know, part of this issues of dealing with large catalytic project that transforms an economy goes back to the way our community, our development partners were working in country to develop projects and programs. And in the case of Guyana, what we had was a partner working in multiple sectors. Obviously, all these sectors have competing interests. And so the development agenda or the development paradigm was structured along the development of small incremental steps. So for example, if you had a partner bringing 100 million, in this case, if you take UK CIF bringing $66 million into a program, it would have been divided into small projects scattered across a number of sectors, all of which have tremendous needs in education, in health, in agriculture, in infrastructure, in energy, you name it, every single sector has got great demands. And so the development trajectory, both from the point of view of the development partner and from national requirement, allowed only growth and development in the country in small incremental steps. And this is what drives the requirement for national and governmental leadership in making strategic decisions that these small incremental steps in multiple sectors is not enough to be transformative. It's not enough to leapfrog the economy into the development agenda that it wants to pursue. You may well recall that at the beginning of this UK CIF intervention, the first set of response was a huge array of small projects from many partners, including Guyana, until it was agreed at a subsequent time over the extended period that governments will use this money in one or two catalytic projects to transform the economy and to grow the economy. So that's the first issue, first thing that we learned, how development partners can work with governments, taking leadership out of government development agenda and develop projects that will leapfrog the development of a particular sector. The second, and stretching from that or coming from that, is the role of the development partner to be encouraged to concentrate development in small number of sectors or a single development area. This was not an easy task, or this generally is not an easy task when one comes to working with development partners. So the second objective was to get the partners to coalesce around a particular development agenda in selected areas and to invest at scale. Not just invest at scale. If you're investing in education, not just one school, but a range of schools. Now, that demanded, as a result of the need to leapfrog development, as a result of the need to invest at scale in individual sectors, how do we structure adequate financing to reach that? And this is where the whole concept of the blended operation came into being. So that in the case of the road infrastructure that we're doing in Guyana, which is a critical link between Georgetown and Brazil, our large partner, the cost of infrastructure was so huge that applying only the UK SIF component, which is a grant, to do that project was going to make no meaningful impact. And that is how the whole engagement came about with the Caribbean Development Bank to finance the project using the blended mechanism where, in this particular case, UK SIF invested 66.2 million. I'm rounding off numbers. CDB, out of its concessional window, invested 10.9 million. CDB, out of its market window, which is the OCR window, invested 101.4 million. And the government of Guyana, out of counterpart financing, invested 11.5 million, aggregating to the largest project being done by the CDB and one of the largest infrastructure projects at that time in Guyana of 190 million US dollars. So, in brief, leadership on the side of government to recognize the need to develop projects that are catalytic in nature, that are transformative in nature, was a critical content. And I heard the comment made earlier about governmental leadership and political willingness to do things. And this is not an easy task, given, as I pointed out before, the grave need that exists in multiple sectors. But that political consciousness and strategic leadership has to come, and has to come from the top. Having done that, to then work with the development partners to let them understand that that leadership needs to be transformed in how the development partner is going to concentrate effort to plant their flag, so to speak, and to invest at scale in particular investment projects. Having said those two things, how do we raise the resource for it? And the resources could not only come from the development partner, but has to come from, well, it's coming from the development partner, but it's coming from multiple windows. As to close this, you would recall that although we're not in an IMF program, we have taken in Guyana the position that we were not going to be borrowing at non-concessional rate, meaning that we had a self-imposed requirement to make certain that loans meet the 35% grant element. And essentially, in this particular structuring, SDF at 1%, OCR at 3.75%, UK SIF at 0%, and the government counterpart contribution at 0% gives you the good composite that allows us to invest in a project at scale, to invest in a project that is catalytic, dynamic, and is transformative in nature, and allow our partners to join arms together so that we can make this a reality. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balgobin. Oh, please applaud if you appreciate his comments. There was a lot of love in the room there, Mr. Balgobin, for your comments, and I think what stood out for me was that political leadership point is really important, and we've touched on that from other panelists as well, but also the coordination between development partners. We need to get that right, and I'm going to try and press that on you if we have time, press you further on how we do that if we have time later. Inea, I wanted to turn to you next and ask, you're working as the client of Mr. Balgobin in the government or other governments around the region. I wanted to turn to you and ask, from your perspective, what lessons are you learning implementing these projects in the Caribbean, working with these clients in this region? So I'd appreciate you to bring out some of the lessons that you've learned. And I think we've also, as a second question, if I can, we've got a lot of funding agencies in this room, on the chair next to you, CDB obviously here as well, and the World Bank on the line. What would you say to those funding agencies? What do you think is needed from those funding agencies to help countries and yourselves support countries to implement these projects?
Yeah. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So thank you first of all for inviting me to this conference, this round table. I'll try to wrap up the most significant insights from our experience in the Caribbean and also in other parts of the world. And we know that, look, the future of an infrastructure is intrinsically an unknown topic, and we as consultants are called to work just in less than the 10% of the lifespan. And in this period, we share the responsibility with the other stakeholders and decision makers to shape the destiny of these projects. So today, the background is that while it's the climate change nowadays is an unquestionable fact, the effectiveness of our response to long-term climate change is now the big question mark. So everyone sees that climate is changing, but we are trying to react to that, but still we can't know exactly what will happen in the next future. So one of the biggest issue and impacting factor that we've learned as a common point to many, many projects is the adaptability of the project management capacity, of the project management response of the stakeholders, either governments or consultants. So we see that there are two proactive solutions to that. One is ready at hand, and the second is yet to come. So in our experience, contract management within the project management world is something for which we see the best experiences when using, for example, standard contracts in place like FIDIC. And whenever we see FIDIC applied, we see that the contract management, both for consultants and contractors, has a better implementation. And most of all, now FIDIC provides as an additional service not only the contract templates, but also training, updated contracts, which can take into account what we need in this rapidly changing world, such as the impact of pandemics, for example, adapting the force majeure clauses, or global supply chains crisis for wars or other extreme events. And so we see that, and we would recommend, as the World Bank is already doing, World Bank has made an agreement with FIDIC to adopt these contracts in many of their contracts. So one very first suggestion on the short term to all financing institutions is to consider how this FIDIC product could be comfortable for them, could be used. And it is in this environment, well, the second long-term solution is related to the capacity to quickly adapt to rapidly changing world. I'm talking about all those new advanced technologies that are rapidly evolving, which under the name of artificial intelligence or big data analysis software are knocking at the door. So we cannot, sooner or later, we'll have to let them in. So today, all those advanced technologies are considered in all global conferences the real game changer for the future. Of course, they have costs, so it's not easy and quick to implement, but I think that for all the international institutions financing projects, they can be a big support to decision makers to have a more accurate view and to have a better support to allocate risks, for example. The same happens for consultants, as they have a big, they enhance the capacities of consultants to provide more accurate scenarios in complex environments with unstructured data, which is now the key to provide effective design and consultancies. Just a few examples from our experience in the phases that we are involved in, which are typically the planning, design phase, and construction phase. We see that we often face issues in the environmental and social impact studies. This is due not only to natural discrepancies between local legislations and financing agency standards, but also because often the time for preliminary screening is very tight and data are unstructured, and most of all, stakeholder engagement is not always as effective as it should be. So in this rapidly changing context, having tools who can help to the consultants and the decision makers to elaborate massive data set will be very, very helpful. Of course, AI cannot replace decision makers or consultants. This is a myth that we have to dispel. But what we can say is that consultants and decision makers who will embrace AI will replace those who do not. So this is to say that, of course, stakeholder engagement remains a very human-based action and procedure. I think that in a globalized world as the one we are living in, establishing a sort of cultural intelligence is, well, the key to understand these international projects. Promoting workshops for assimilating different cultures, and most of all, promoting the engagement of the most vulnerable groups. We have experiences, especially with indigenous communities, who are commonly the more shy group to be involved, and they always tend to remain behind. And it's very important to involve them, as Roberto was saying, from the very beginning. So procedures, involvement plans must be clear from the very beginning. Budget must be allocated from the very beginning on these topics, because sooner or later the consequences will be seen after that. Just another example on the construction phase issues that we are facing nowadays. It's again about how to manage these contracts who may have 3 or 4 years duration. And recently we are facing a big crisis in the global supply chain. Could have we anticipated the impact of the drought in the Panama Canal region? Yeah. I don't know, but the canal authorities now is planning to cut by 50% the vessel transit by February 24. So if we are considering then the upcoming rainy seasons in many countries, there could be a delay of up to 1 year in many projects if your strategic goods comes from the Pacific suppliers to the Caribbean. So, of course, I don't know if we can predict these extreme events, but they are rapidly occurring. So also here, we need to make use of most advanced technologies, because traditional method will be soon obsolete to tackle these reactions. Last but not least, I would say that what we can share and see as a common line for many projects, not only in the Caribbean, is the awareness of what sustainability is. And when we talk about sustainability, we include safety, resilience, inclusivity. So if you ask too many institutions or countries what is sustainability for them, you may find different answers. And we think that if we could pool all the results, if we could share databases on all the results about the sustainable projects that have been implemented, we could be more aligned on a common understanding of those. And we see that recently there were many sustainability rating systems on the market which could support, they can never substitute, well, decision makers of that, but they can support the evaluation of projects between them. They can enhance comparability. They can also give some new tool to reward consultants or contractors who may offer specific products or solution, because actually it's a new metric, very standardized, very transparent, very fair, that we are promoting. Of course, there are many standards from America, from other parts of the countries, but the good news is that they have a holistic and comprehensive view of what a sustainable infrastructure should be, from the early planning phase to the final commissioning. So we think that if these protocol systems can be explored also by the international financing institutions, they can bring an added value even in the planning phase until the commissioning phase. Mm-hmm. This is my contribution so far, so we'll see if there are any questions or more insights.
Really, really interesting. And you've got me thinking about AI and how we can use that in big data. And it feels like a long way to go, but if we can really embrace those tools, maybe we can really tackle some of the challenges that we're seeing and we're talking about. Fantastic. Okay, Natalia, I wanted to come to you on that point around technology and the advancement of technology and the analysis to try and predict the kinds of shocks and stresses that Eneo was just mentioning, droughts in Panama, and we've mentioned lots of other types of disasters as well. Can you talk a bit more about what the World Bank's doing in this space to try and understand those challenges and then make the best decisions on projects and investments for sustainable development?
Thank you for that question. I mean, I can speak a little bit more about maybe what in GFDR we'll also look at in terms of understanding risks. And of course, right now in the context of the climate change, also an understanding or modeling, like projecting how climate change can also affect those hazards. So we look at a lot of like how do what is the data available locally or like globally too in terms of the hazards, the probabilities. Also at the asset level, so in terms of the infrastructure, what are the vulnerabilities, like what are the conditions of materials, how do they deteriorate along the life cycle, and like how those hazards can affect them. Then there is the question of like the exposure of those assets to those hazards. And of course then in the piece of the information that I share in terms of the prioritization, think a lot about that infrastructure is usually part of a system, and then how that system performs in the context of the possible damages that we get to understand from that data available and those projections. And once we can model some of that impact at the system level, of course, and how do we quantify direct and also indirect impacts, and some analysis that help us think strategic about what are the investments that what are some of the vulnerabilities at the system level, and also using potentially some of those analysis also for thinking about prioritization. And of course, when we're looking at prioritization, we also need to compound the information needed to think about the cost of the possible investments and investments that, as we have all reflected, I feel in the different panelists, is that the solutions are not just in the right, like improve design, right? It's also along the life cycle, and there are measures that will improve that resilience. So that is the ideal case, I would say, in terms of like how we want to assess those risks, quantified impacts, and think about prioritization. And then, I mean, from the global facility in GFDR, there are some resources in terms of supporting that technical assistance at the project level, preparation, and also in the knowledge of like how to apply those methods, how to gather some of that data. To help to work with the client countries from the World Bank, and making sure those investments are informed by some of those technical studies, the best available information that is out there, no? And then also from those studies, like I think that it helps us also gather a lot more evidence of what other information is needed, no? What are still the gaps to improve our decision support systems?
Talia, that's really, really interesting, and I think there's a lot to do in this space. I know the World Bank is doing a lot of this already, but there is a lot to do. And I want to turn to Roberto now as the other development bank on this panel. And if there's anything in that technology space you wanted to share, that would be fantastic. But I also wanted to draw out the question around coordination of development partners that Mr. Valgoben raised. I think it's a really important one. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, how IDB is working on that, and how that might open up opportunities for us all to do better together going forwards. Sure,
Harriet. Very important topic you mentioned. In fact, we're working very, very strongly in the part of coordination. You know, in the infrastructure sector in the Caribbean, we're more than 15 agencies or development partners working all together. And, you know, it's important that we talk to each other, we coordinate what we're doing, because otherwise we would be sort of overlapping in some of the areas. We would be doing twice or three times the same study, the same report, the same assessment. And so there's a very important role for development partners to coordinate in that front. But at the same time, I think the governments from each one of the countries have a very important role in that front as well, because they are the ones who, in fact, know what's happening in their country, which development partner is helping on what. So there is a role for both sides, I believe, and that's the way it works the best. I remember when I was in the Pacific in the past, in another hat, there were about 25 development partners working together in a vast area like the Pacific, and in the absence of coordination, it was really messy, but it actually worked very well. And I think in the Caribbean, we are making a lot of improvement in that front, and I would invite everyone to take into account the coordination, and you can get much more effectiveness of the resources. And talking about opportunities, Harriet, that you are mentioning, in fact, is because when we talk about resilience and we talk about climate change and mitigation and the like, we know that mitigation is not really the name of the game here in the Caribbean, but rather adaptation and resilience. The carbon emissions in aggregate level from the Caribbean are really very small. But the interesting part is that the Caribbean wants to be part of the solution also in the mitigation. And this opens up a very important opportunity, as we are already seeing, in bringing climate finance, which is obviously resources that have very concessional terms. And it's already happening, through UK CIF, ourselves. There's a number of donors that are providing resources, the Green Climate Fund and the like. And the interesting part of that is that it can help bring new technologies which are more resilient into the sectors as well. So when we talk about resiliency, mitigation can help access those concessional financing, which is a big opportunity in our view. Another opportunity we see are sort of cross-cutting, cross-sectoral areas. Infrastructure, if we look at it as in silos is one thing. If we cut across, there's plenty of opportunities, particularly in large ocean states, as we usually like to call them, because all the sectors in small economies, they get closer to each other. For instance, there's plenty of discussions being made in terms of electric mobility now on the shipping space, and shipping is a very important. Ports are very important for the Caribbean. We know worldwide, in fact, 80% of the trade is going by ships, but in the Caribbean, it represents a lot. And IMO, the International Maritime Organization, as you guys are aware, in July this year, there was an agreement to go into a more ambitious strategy for greenhouse gas reductions. And so that calls for a number of actions to be made. And we signed an agreement with the Caribbean Shipping Association. We are working with them in some ways map out what needs to be done for this space. But all these areas call for cutting across silos. Energy services in ports, in transport, in aviation, in a number of infrastructure services that are being provided. And this is going to be very important in the way forward for a number of reasons. But Enia was mentioning about the sustainability ratings in future. We talk about connectivity. Aviation is also working in terms of their transition to sustainable aviation fuels. But we need to make sure that there's going to be the supply here in the area. Yeah. So same with shipping, And so very important to be working and thinking about those things. There's going to be a large requirement for huge scale of green fuels in the future, and this could be a very good opportunity for the Caribbean. In terms of digitalization and new technologies, it was mentioned before, just didn't want to miss that chance of mentioning how this can contribute a lot. And they're already contributing a lot in terms of infrastructure. In fact, we're seeing that they are driving that transformational change. We already see it in the electricity space. Consumers are also producing self-generating, and so changing into the term of prosumers, as we know. In water management also, digitalization can help a lot regulate find different ways of regulating and measuring the consumption of water. In transportation, we have seen a lot of these new networks of shared riding that in some changes are decentralizing transportation services as well, but also in the construction and the maintenance of infrastructure. Digital tools, satellites, data, geospatial planning, drones for maintenance, all of these elements are being deployed. In fact, all of these elements also can support predictive maintenance, in addition to corrective maintenance, but also predictive maintenance. Predictive maintenance. You know, the Internet of Things, big data analysis can now allow for understanding what are the areas that need to be sort of invested in infrastructure to prevent rather than correct management. So all of some of these areas, some examples of areas that we are seeing. Thanks,
That's
Harriet.
brilliant. Thank you so much, Roberto. Very, very interesting. And I think we're hearing a lot of really interesting perspectives from the panelists. Before I dive into a couple more questions, I do want to give you some pre-warning that we're definitely going to welcome questions from the floor, and I think we have the facility online as well. So if you would like to pose your questions to the panelists, get your thinking caps on, and I'll come to you in a couple of questions' time. I wanted to go back to Guyana with Mr. Balgobin, and we're joined here this week by project management teams and professionals from across the region. We had talked, the point has been made around project management capacity being challenged and stretched, and project teams having to deliver multiple projects, complex projects at the same time while following procurement rules that are different, managing contracts that are different too. From your experience in Guyana, I'd love to hear your perspective about how we as the development community, development partners, try to tackle that challenge in the Caribbean.
You'd like my take on that?
Yes, please.
Sure. I think Roberto has done a brilliant job in talking about the donor coordination mechanism. So he's absolutely correct. We have a major constraint within the Caribbean. We are small in numbers, very small administrative core in governments where these projects are being implemented. And it stretches us out when you have multiple projects needing to be invested in a particular sector. One of the things that we have...
Just one second, we're not seeing you. I don't know if your camera's off, but we would love to see your face if we can.
It wasn't. Yeah.
We're hearing you okay, but we can't see you.
Are you seeing me now?
There we go, fantastic. Please continue, please
Okay.
continue.
Yeah, so what is happening is that we have to address this from two fronts. We have to address the coordination at the governmental front. And in the case of Guyana, we have started to do that. In the Work Services Group, for example, in the Ministry of Public Works, we have what is called the Work Services Group. That is an integrated group of project managers and skills to manage projects in a single integrated group, irrespective of which development partner is investing in the sector. Each investment is a sectorial objective. The overall sectorial objective needs to be achieved. And when it is done in splintered way, there are chances that what is being done by one development partner is not coordinated efficiently and effectively within government, and that is what we're trying to avoid. So in the case of the Ministry of Public Works, we have what is called the Work Services Group. In the case of the Ministry of Health, we have the Health Sector Development Unit. In the case of agriculture, we have the Agriculture Development Unit. But here's the challenge. When there are multiple partners, there is still a multiple requirement by the development partner to have specialized skills even within that. So take procurement, for example. Each development partner has its niche in how they do procurement. There has been talk already about harmonizing the procurement rules between and among development partners. And that has never evolved beyond the big chit-chats that we've been having over the years. But we need to do that. If you talk about, for example, take the infrastructure space, we would have done ESIAs, for example, in particular sector. But when you come to invest with another development partner, there is a requirement to conduct an ESIA. There's a requirement to do an ESMP. But that is not that the country has not done that. And I heard the comment being made about the use of the digital space that we have. These are information that is already available, and we do not need to rewrite those issues, but to piggyback on those development agenda. I'll give you a classic example: the water sector. We have an investment from the Caribbean Development Bank. The methodology, the design characteristics of the water sector have been designed in a particular way for the Caribbean Development Bank. We have an investment from the European Union. The design characteristics are different. So we have to go back to the drawing board and design again. We have an investment from the IDB. IDB design characteristics are different. So what we end up with, 3, 4 different kinds of water sector plans. Each one of it requires its own maintenance, requires its own operation, has its own technology, and therefore cannot share across the board the harmonization we just talked about. So the development partners have to be able to come to grips with understanding the narrow space, the development space that they're working with, the paucity of skills that exist in these small countries. I am specifically talking about Guyana. We have a small core of engineers. We have a small core of procurement specialists. We have a small core of finance experts. But that does not mean that small core cannot implement all the projects funded by or supported by other development partners under a common leadership. And that Paris Declaration, harmonizing of donors' interest in a country, is not yet unfolding the way it should. And that commits the country to a new set of investments in human resources, a new set of investment in technology that is unnecessary, in our opinion, and needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. Now, that goes to the boards of the various institutions. And small countries like ours don't have the voice to change at the governor's level, at the institutional level, the trajectory that big multilateral organization like the IDB or the World Bank or even the CDB is moving at. So we need to be able, as a group within the region, to bring this to the fore of how international development partners work in our territory. And this is posing a severe challenge. So essentially, using the data sources that we have, harmonizing around them, institutionally developing the capacity in the country, and using that institutional development team to implement multiple projects funded by either the national budget and or with support from international development partner. Also, given that we are making the case that the hybrid situation of bringing partners together and merging their resources together is one place that we're starting from. So the financing, for example, of the one that we're talking about now, the road we're doing, is being accounted for through a single entity, the Caribbean Development Bank. The procurement is being handled through a single entity, the procurement of the methodology of the Caribbean Development Bank. And that's the way we have to go. We have to be able to support countries where they are trying to get to a point to implement projects more effectively and more efficiently. And in that support, it is not giving us new procurement specialists, giving us new finance experts. It's using the resource we have and harmonizing to make certain that that resource is utilized to its optimum, given the paucity of skills that exist in the region. And that's my broad comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was a lot in there, and I think a lot to think about as a development community about how we can work better together to support these countries that have these really small capacities, really small project teams for the amount of infrastructure that is needed. Mr. Valgobin touched on ESIAs, and Anaya, I wanted to ask more about Polytechnica's journey on this kind of social inclusion and environmental agenda. We've heard that, if you don't include the communities that infrastructure is supposed to serve at the beginning, it becomes a barrier down the line, and if you don't work with them through the whole project cycle. So I wanted to understand or hear more of your perspectives of Polytechnica's journey on that social inclusion front, because I've heard from a lot of people in this room while I've been around the region, oh, this is new for us engineers. We're learning how to do this. So I'd love to hear your perspectives and your journey on how that has gone.
Yes, for us, we are an engineering company, so one of the first barriers is that we need non-engineers to tackle this topic. And from our perspective and our strategic policy, whenever we tackle the social and environmental matters in another country, the first thing to do is establish a good network with local professionals, of course. So almost all of our experts in social matters and environmental matters come from the local territory, except in specific cases when we have a combination of international experts to bring in some fresh expertise, state of the art, but the local component is always essential. And this is because whenever we have big projects, we know that we need the local content to be credible, first of all, because many times local communities are reluctant to open up to new projects, big impacting projects. So when I was saying before, we are experiencing the biggest issues probably are with indigenous communities for two reasons. The first one is that maybe intrinsically they are shy to express, to show up, so they always stay a bit behind. And the second is because probably they're not used to these big projects, because that is the project of their life, because a big road crossing their villages will come just once in a lifetime. So this is why we often need to put a lot of attention on those topics, employing maybe 2 or 3 staff. Just while we may have just one engineer for civil infrastructures, we need at least 2 or 3 staffs, not only social experts, but also community liaison officers from the country, with a permanent and resident activity on site to skip barriers of any time, not only because maybe local communities may be shy, we may have language barriers, we may have problems in expressing their concern, because of course a big project is changing the territory. So yes, despite you have a strong environmental monitoring plan, you still need to understand in their perspective, what does this mean? Because if you're changing a water body, for you maybe you can apply international standards to do that, but if you don't put yourself in their shoes, you can't understand if you're really getting their commitment. So the lesson learned, not only in the Caribbean, but also in Africa and in other countries we're working in, is that these large infrastructure projects, we mainly are focused on road projects, are not just engineering projects. Maybe the engineering component is the easiest part. This is the paradox, it's the easiest part. Instead, there are many other topics that have nothing to do with the engineering, but that are the grounds for the success of a project. Just an anecdote. In many projects, we had the request for in Europe, you try to avoid cities and villages with your roads, right? In many other countries, the opposite. You can't put the road, align the road too far from the villages, because the villages will move. So in many places, we saw that it was more appreciated to have a light post in the middle of the village where the people could gather at night, rather than other facilities, compensating or mitigation facility. So what we appreciate very much is at the end of the project when we see the feedback from the communities. Because just for instance, we were talking about SDG goals before, and we thought that our work is mainly about infrastructure, sustainable infrastructures. That is not. We discovered that our work has an impact, for example, on the SDGs about education. Why? Because when you build a big road infrastructures, you help students and teachers reach the educational facilities that maybe before they couldn't.
Yeah.
So actually, that indirect benefit is maybe the most important one, rather than just connecting villages, but improving the life of the communities.
Brilliant. It's great to hear more of your perspectives on that. Thank you very much. I wanted to now turn to the room and see if there are any questions that people had that they wanted to put to any of the panelists or all of the panelists. I think we have a roving mic, maybe. Oh, the mics are on the tables. They should work. Okay, fantastic. We got any takers? Maybe while you're thinking about it, are there any online questions? There's a comment.
Right, hopefully you can hear me. So it's not a question, but it's a comment from Mr. Ralph Burkhoff, and he suggests that more emphasis needs to be made on modular and prefab construction components for Caribbean infrastructure. It's time to move away from concrete block construction that depends on imported materials.
Any comments the panel would like to? You didn't hear. Sorry, the comment was around someone suggesting there needs to be more a movement towards prefabricated types of construction and moving away from concrete blocks and pouring concrete. So maybe as the engineer, you have any perspectives on that?
Yes, it's a big challenge, and of course it depends on the complexity of the project itself. We had projects in which the complexity was mainly the size of the project, which could be the length of the road rather than other things. In other projects, we have more complex technologies that cannot be found on the territory, and so they must be brought from outside. So there comes the big question. Are we going to use prefab elements that must be built, I don't know, UK, China, whatever, or have we the capacity to build them on site? Which means if we do want to pursue that road, it's very, very important that at the very beginning of the design, we must know exactly the capacity of the territory. That's a very important survey that we always do, because you never know, in the preliminary design phase, it's not so easy to know what will be the final design, if you will be using prefab or you pour concrete on site. But it's very important because, as I was telling before, if you plan at the last time to use prefab elements such as steel frames or steel structures that you cannot find on site, and then you have the problem of procuring them, and if you now want to procure them from a Pacific supplier, you will get them probably in more than 1 year because of the Panama Canal crisis. If you want to procure them from UK, probably you have more likelihood to have, unless you have also geopolitical problems related to sanctions and restricted trades due, we have, unfortunately, a very polarized world at the moment. So if you may face problems with suppliers that are hit by sanction or restrictions in the trade. So yesterday, maybe the prefab solution was the fastest one, because you can have also more quality assurance. If you buy something that is assembled on factory, probably they may have in place better quality assurance method. So that was good. But today, the balance is 50-50, because yes, you could try to outsource them, but I'm not so sure that it's not better to have your batching plant and prefab factory on site. And in that case, many times you have to adapt your design according to their prefab system, because you cannot just tell them, I just want to do this frame structure according to my design, because there might be sometimes one only company who can do prefab systems. So the challenge is big. I would say that today we have a 50-50 balance, because the world has changed very, very much, both for extreme climate event, but I think also for this geopolitical situation, so that a polarized world is never good for stability and for a global supply chain.
We feel them even in traditional construction, but I suppose it's even more acute when you're buying things from one place and trying to get them delivered. And your point around maintenance and the skill sets that are on islands, because it's a different kind of construction, and do the people on the island have the training to construct those prefabricated elements? I'm looking back out to the floor and I'm seeing no hands, but I want to encourage you to not be shy. Yay, we have a volunteer at the back. Please use your microphone.
Good morning. How do you operate? Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Surendra Singh here. In your experience, can you say distinctly if there's one element why projects are behind schedule, or if there's any project you've worked on which was completed on time?
There we go. Should we go to Guyana first? You want to hear from any particular person, or should we share it out?
I've been in this business for about 20 years, and I've never found a project which was completed on time. And ever so often I hear from the authorities of warning contractors and warning contractors. I think they should stop warning contractors.
Mr. Balgovan, any responses to the question? Hopefully you could hear us.
Yes. Well, there are projects that have been completed on time. I'm not sure that the young man knows all the projects, but by and large, there are several instances where projects go beyond their timeline, and herein calls to question the supervising engineer. So it is not that we're leaving the projects unattended. There are contractual terms. All contracts have specific contractual terms, and it's obligatory on the part of the supervising engineer to advise the client, because in all these huge projects, the government employs international consultants who are required to supervise and manage the projects for and on behalf of the government, and they should invoke those clauses in the contract, especially clauses to do with poor performance, clauses to do with delays, time delay, clauses to do with escalation of cost in the project. So there are numerous clauses in contracts, whether it's FIDIC or otherwise. And the flaw in the system is that we do not make use of this as effectively and as diligently as we should. And so we allow contractors to have a free range in going beyond specific contract times. Of course, there are liquidated damages clause that can be invoked, and where these clauses themselves do not, at this point in time, allow effective use, then maybe what we have to do is to get back to the books, the drawing board, and strengthen those clauses, so that we can have a situation where contractors are held liable and consultants are held liable. Mind you, this is not only the response of the contractor. Consultants also are guilty of not administering the project for and on behalf of government as they should. So it's a two-pronged approach. We need to strengthen and institute where we don't have clauses in consultants' contract to ensure that they administer the project in accordance with the rules and the contractual terms of the contract, and where the contract itself is weak, we need to strengthen those clauses. I think that's the way forward.
I think that's a really good answer, and I hope that helps you. I think I'd also encourage you that during this week, speak to your colleagues around this room and try and start to understand what are other people's the challenges they're facing. Mr. Balgovan outlined some then, but I've got Mr. Moody down here in the front, and his project raced through its timelines. So have a chat with him about what went well, how they managed to plan in advance to try and set up a project as best as possible to get the best outcomes on timelines. We've got two questions. I saw this hand first, so this gentleman on this side.
Good morning. Joseph Singh from Guyana. I would like to answer Mr. Singh's question very directly and inform him that the IDB-funded Maternal and Child Health Improvement Project, MCHIP, was successfully completed in Guyana on schedule. And of course, a lot of the success of that project was tied to the relevancy of the design and the amount of preparation that went into the design phase. And it involved a lot of, a significant amount of local input, including direct beneficiary input into the design phase. And of course, it also involves the involvement of local personnel in the beneficiary communities, as well as in the executing agencies, which in this case was the Ministry of Health. And all of these factors, when combined together, help to anticipate and prepare for, and make adjustment for, eventualities which, for example, expatriate expertise would not have known. And interestingly enough, this same project was executed during the worst of COVID, 2020, 2019, 2021. And even in the middle of COVID, it was successfully completed on time and on schedule. And it had several elements to it, but it also had construction and infrastructure elements as well, as certain medical and institutional and supply chain and support elements. So it's not a non-infrastructure project which was completed on time. It's a project which also has significant infrastructure elements which was completed on time. And we'd be happy to share some more with you, in a sidebar if you need.
Sorry, I missed the name of the project.
Maternal and Child Health Improvement Project, MCHIP. Yeah.
So you can maybe...
Yes, including significant construction elements.
No, you finished on time. That date that you were supposed to finish on, you finished.
Yeah.
The date you were supposed to finish, you finished.
My short answer is yes, and my long answer is yes. And my long answer is yes.
Close it up. Mr. Moody, I called your name because I know the projects in Belize have been doing well on their timelines. Is there anything you wanted to add into this discussion? I know you don't have a microphone on your desk, but maybe you could borrow from next door just to add your perspective to that.
Just to elaborate on what Natalia and Roberto mentioned.
Jump a bit closer to me.
Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right, just to elaborate on what Natalia and Roberto mentioned this morning, good planning and good design is two of the key important elements for us to complete your project on schedule. And what is also important is the planning and sequencing of works. That has played a significant role in us completing our projects back in Belize. And the two projects that we have, the Coastal Highway Upgrading Project and the Philip Golston Highway Upgrading Project, the first one has been completed on time and on budget. And we had significant savings within that project as well, that we were able to implement more works and still completed those projects within the deadline that was scheduled. So it's very important for you to also review the designs that are presented by the consultants, and that was something that we did before we commenced those projects. What is also good is that we have a strong project execution unit, which is key to the implementation of these projects, and that has worked well for us back in Belize.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Lenski, please jump in.
Good morning, everyone. Lenski Douglas, Port Modernization Project, Kingstown, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. Listening into the debate thus far, I've been making some notes, and I think our project is best placed to illustrate some of the lessons learned that your panelists would have discussed, from financing to project planning, the inclusion of climate resilient factors, social engagement, and so on. Just by way of information, the port modernization project has been, as a project, has been in implementation since 2009. From the concept phase, we're currently in construction. During the feasibility procurement bidding phase, we were impacted by the Hurricane Elsa. We were impacted by COVID, and we were also impacted by the local volcanic eruption. You can easily project to see that circumstances would have changed very drastically at a point where it was sensitive in terms of the project going forward. This manifested itself in, let's say, increased, higher than anticipated insurance costs because we were in the process of bidding when the volcano and COVID and Elsa would have been impacted. And that is also in addition to the issues of supply chain disruptions, which were known back then, but now also exacerbated by the challenges of the Panama Canal. I just want to say that the commitment of the CDB, the UKSIF, and our other financiers was one of the lessons learned and pillars in terms of ensuring that the project continues. Because as the dynamic changed, the support from the CDB UK government was unwavering in terms of ensuring that this project gets to the point of realization. We also had a significant resettlement component, which is the social side of getting large infrastructure projects done. And the early engagement of our community liaison officer was one of our best lessons learned. But also the engagement of the project affected personnel, observing that we need to do consultancies to, for example, develop adequate resettlement action plan to deal with those social issues, and also to ensure that they are implemented within the safeguards, both environmental and otherwise, for successful implementation. So I just wanted to add that, and I may want to take a plug to say that our project is on schedule. All right, so it may, let's see what happens May 2025. We could probably answer if it's delivered on time also.
We were creating a bit of a competition in the room here. We're going to have to set up a little league of who's going to win. Was there another question in the middle at the back that I missed? Yeah, please go ahead.
Andy Mario, Ministry of Public Works, Guyana. It was more of a comment. I hear my colleagues reinforcing contractual terms to tie contractors into completing on time. But I think something that it's a bit taboo, I guess. But contract provisions for providing incentivization for early completion of projects. I found outside of public sector projects, in the private sector, sometimes clients incentivize, they would pay contractors a premium to finish before time. And if they achieve that, they get, for example, the completion of the contingencies. Another thing that we don't widely use here, and might be something to consider, is the value engineering. Sometimes in projects, well, we have to do a proper design, well, we have to do our groundwork. Some things do occur on site as implementation continues. However, what I found in my experience is sometimes contractors also can make very practical suggestions that can pull your project in time and can probably even reduce costs. I'm not sure my colleagues in other regions, if they've ever had any experience with value engineering proposals from contractors, but we have noted that it does have value, and it can help reeling in a project that is potentially going a bit of outside of the time.
Thank you for that intervention. I suppose value engineering is part, it seems to be part of a lot of projects. Roberto, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that point or the discussion before.
Just very quickly, and on that topic, well, from a procurement standpoint, from the multilateral development banks, we have updated our procurement policies in a sense that we can now focus on value for money. Usually it's the least cost, but at the end of the day, when we want to incorporate all these positive externalities, we have to factor them into the life cycle of the project and cost them throughout that life cycle of the project, and then bring them back to the net present value. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be, if you analyze the capex, doesn't mean it's going to be the least cost, but it's going to be the least cost throughout the life cycle of the project. So we have done all of those within the IDB policy rules as well.
Brilliant, fantastic. Please.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Adam Pinney. I'm representing BSI here, but for the purposes of this question, I'm representing myself. I think all the suggestions and ideas we've heard for improving the whole process are correct and appropriate. So my question is the following. Can we expect that when we leave this conference at the end of the week, all of the suggestions that have been made will be implemented, and consequently, if we come back in a couple of years, we won't be talking about the same issues, but we'll be talking about other issues? Or, and this is the important part, are there underlying blocking reasons which prevent these good and common sense suggestions from being taken up? And if so, what are they?
That is a very, very big and broad question, and I feel like we might need all of the leaders of CARICOM in the room to help you answer that. But I'm wondering, Natalia, I mean, I know it's a very big question, but can you share some experiences about how you have taken challenges and tried to change them, implement them, so that we're not having the same conversations about resilience over and over again?
That is definitely a difficult question, I think, because I mean, and the question itself was very good. Like, how do we make sure that next time we're not having the same discussions, right, about what is a priority? I think probably a good point is what we heard at the beginning of the panel on, like, how to have good contract management systems that are also are adaptable to, right? Because it is from getting to know, we know all these good practices, but we also know that there's a lot of uncertainty around the process, not just because of the risks, but also just because of the nature of like implementation of projects. We have discussed the challenges on an engagement of the communities and like the different priorities of the different stakeholders that are involved in implementing these projects. So how like that information is used along the process to potentially adapt and kind of maybe rethink when it's needed in the process of implementing those projects. I think that is really one important message to potentially make sure that we're not basically discussing the same. And I think the other part that is really important, just in the general context of resilience, in institutions that are resilient, I think that we need to keep reminding ourselves that our institutions that learn how to learn, like that we are, from past experiences, we gather that evidence of what worked, what didn't work, the gaps, like how do we become better, and being also open, to understand that like looking back is not sometimes thinking about what didn't work and like point out to what doesn't work, but also it is an opportunity to learn, because we know there are always going to be different challenges that maybe we cannot entirely be fully ready to manage. But then, like, if we don't open up the space to look back and learn from those experiences, I think we're definitely going to be in the same circle, like discussing the same things, right? So we also need to have that mindset that how do we open up the space to be more, sometimes, I don't know, critical, but like to think about like those gaps and learn from that. So we have institutions that keep moving forward, like kind of with the availability of new information, new tools, new resources, all this knowledge. Will really have the institutions that will be able to keep progressively implement them. I'm not sure if that totally answers the question, but there's some ideas there.
I think
we move forward.
It was a bit mean of me to throw that one at you, Natalia, but I think you made an extremely good point that if we learn how to learn properly in our jobs, we will all do a much, much better job. And I think that is a huge reason why we are here in this room, so that we can learn how to learn, we can learn from each other, we can cross-pollinate the ideas, like Minister Gonzalez said, and then go back and be better at our jobs and create better infrastructure, better sustainable development for our countries and our communities. And so with that, I'm going to say a huge thank you to our panelists, Enea, Roberto, Natalia, and Mr. Valgobin on the line. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspectives. I think they've been extremely valuable. Thank you to those in the room. Thank you to those online for your engagement as well. And we look forward to the rest of this week. Thank you.